James Harden has an injury to his hamstring. He was out in the regular season because of it, and now he has just it's muscle tightness, I guess, is what they're calling it as. He went straight to the hospital after the game, got injured 40 seconds into it. But main idea here is how far can the Nets go without Harden if he's unable to play for a few of the future games? So, Noah, I'm going to kick this one to you. How far can they go?
So, I mean, I would still say, even without James Harden, they could still make the run to the finals and maybe even win it, although it would be more difficult. I think a big telltale sign was going to be this next game, because I do think that the Bucks present the hardest matchup in the East, even assuming who wins in the Hawks-Sixers series. I think the Bucks have the best matchups against the Nets. So I think this next game will be a telltale sign, but I do think that they could make the run without Harden, even though it will be a little bit harder because of just how good KD and Kyrie are, and just how well, too, the supporting cast kind of fits. Joe Harris is a bucket, so I think they can still make the run, but it will be a little harder, and it'll definitely be a way more even playing field, is the way I see it. What about you, boys?
Yeah, I'm 100% with you, Noel. I still think they're a finals caliber team. I mean, one of the questions they had this year was depth, and I think they answered the depth question already. They get guys' contributions from guys like Landry Shamet. Jeff Green will come back. He contributes. Mike James, for whatever reason, is just a bucket for them off the bench, and he plays the right way for them. Bruce Brown, my former Piston, a guy that I was not too fond of when he was on the Pistons, but he was a hardworking player. He's a really good role player for them, and he's carved out a nice niche for them. So they're actually pretty deep around KD and Kyrie, who are two top 10 players in the NBA. So I think they're still more than capable of going to the finals. Obviously, if they had James Harden, who in my opinion is another top 5 player in the NBA, it would be a no question. But I think that the Bucks and Sixers both present difficult matchups. I mean, if they play the Sixers, especially the Bucks, in different ways, and I think that, Jrue Holiday can maybe trouble Kyrie a little bit with his defense. And obviously PJ Tucker has done the best job of anybody on KD in the playoffs the last few years. But overall, it's really tough to bet against KD and Kyrie just because they're so efficient, and getting buckets for them is so easy, and they give everybody buckets. I mean, last game, I would say both of them didn't really get off, and the Bucks role players played so well. I wouldn't be surprised if either of them has a 40-piece in this game just because they're just that good offensive players. So I'm with you. I think once they get to the finals, winning the finals could be more difficult without James Harden, but I still think they can get to the finals without him.
Interesting. So I'm kind of in the same boat as you guys. I can see them making the finals, but I actually think this is the toughest matchup that they will have getting there easily. Like, I think the Sixers are pretty solid, but I'm more concerned about the Bucks. Just the fact that Giannis matches up so well against them. Usually teams will have, if they have a couple really good wings that can play defense and are strong enough, and then having a traditional center is kind of what you need to build that wall. But the Nets don't have that. Their one center is sometimes KD, and he's guarding Brook Lopez, and he's giving up a lot there. And then Claxton comes in, but he's not, he's a little he's not the biggest guy either, so he doesn't really pose too much of a threat. And that's where I say, okay, Giannis is going to feast regardless. I think he's going to play really well every game. I mean, the first game he shot 16 of 24, and that was great. Now, I just need to see them make threes. Like, they shot abysmal. Like, they really could not have shot much worse, and that goes with Chris Middleton. I don't think Jrue Holiday shot the best either. He shot a lot better than Middleton. And then the guys like Bryn Forbes and Connaughton, they need to be able to hit shots, because if they can hit shots, that's where I'm like, okay, I can realistically see the Bucks win. And that's kind of where I think about the Nets now without Harden. And if Kyrie or KD has a bad game, or Joe Harris isn't making shots like usual, or we don't see Blake Griffin drop 18, like all the role players on the Nets played incredibly well. Mike James missed one shot. Like, you did not expect that going in, and that's where I think, okay, the Nets played incredibly well. All their players did, really. And that's kind of why I like the Bucks, and just the fact that if they can play an average game and they play more than 35 minutes, their big three, they should be good. But I don't know if I entirely trust that. So I'm saying if the Nets win this series, I see them in the finals easily, but this is their toughest series for me.
Yeah, and I would definitely agree with that. And I think that this series is the toughest matchup, and I think it really does. I already said this, but it comes down to this next game where I think if the Nets come into Milwaukee and they beat the Bucks in 2 games, and where Harden has played 1 minute, he has played 1 minute total, that would just be such a confidence boost to an already talented roster. But I think it could carry them to beating the Bucks, and then because it's their hardest matchup, taking them the rest of the way to the finals. And I think that one thing that just makes the Nets so hard to game plan against too, even without James Harden, is like Giannis, PJ Tucker are 2 of the best matchups you can have on KD, and they still can't, he still kind of gets the shots wherever he wants, and he can kind of do that day in, day out. So it's just one of those players who you almost can't game plan against. And when you have such a consistent form of offense, it just really makes you such, I would say, more of an elite team. Because you see teams like the Clippers just got past the Mavericks, but even with how talented Kawhi and Paul George are, sometimes down the stretch, they struggle with getting their shots and getting their spots. Where KD, I just feel like even if he's missing, always gets the shot he wants. Which I think is just such an elite tendency and a hard thing to game plan against.
Yeah, and that's why you don't see a lot of bad games for Kevin Durant ever. His bad games are maybe where he's shooting 46% from the floor and 35% from 3, because he's always so efficient at getting exactly what shot he wants. And that's why I'm so confident in the Nets. And I'm with you. I think game 2 is actually a really big game. I think for the Bucks, it's not too big of a deal, but for the Nets to protect their home court, I think it's really important, because you brought up names like Bryn Forbes and Pat Connaughton. I mean, Bryn Forbes was one of the best 3-point shooters in the NBA this year. He shot the lights out of the Heat in 1 game. I don't expect Bryn Forbes to continue shooting the way he did in game 1. And so I think it's really important for the Nets to win both their games at home and go into Milwaukee with that 2-0 advantage. Because let's say even the Bucks win those 2 games at home, the Nets still feel very confident because they know they'll have 2 out of the next 3 at home. And it's tough to bet against Kevin Durant and Kyrie in that situation. Blake, I am with you in the sense that I think the Bucks is their toughest series. I think the Sixers can be tough, but I think Embiid's knee has kind of made sure the Bucks are tough, just because for either of those players, the Nets don't have a real guy that can guard them. With Giannis, the key is you need a guy that's strong enough to take Giannis's body when he drives, but also quick enough to be able to move with his Euro step. So like in an ideal world, that's where Kawhi Leonard was so good. And then you let the help defense swarm, because once you stop him on his pivot in the lane, he kind of gets stuck, and he's not really great at shooting over and around people with great touch. So like the Nets don't, like KD is technically fluid and long enough to do it, but he can't take Giannis's body. Blake Griffin certainly can't do it. I would say he doesn't do.
He did a good job, honestly, though. Like in the first game, Blake Griffin did a pretty superb job in my mind to what I thought like he would do.
It's a little bit like the PJ Tucker on KD, right? Like you can see the guys playing great defense, but Giannis is still scoring, and KD still scoring. It was like Dylan Brooks did such an awesome job on Steph in that play-in game, and Steph gave him 38. So it's like I think that the Nets don't have that true guy to guard him, and like Nico Claxton can't take his body and all of that. So like I think it's a really tough matchup. Where I just keep coming back to with the Nets is, whatever reason with Giannis Antetokounmpo, he doesn't play 40 minutes in the playoffs. And I guess that's on Coach Bud. I don't know who it's on. I don't know whether Giannis is unable to play that much or whatever. That's where, when you go down 2-0, the reason I think the Nets would have a giant advantage and the Bucks would struggle to come back, that's a game usually, when Kawhi Leonard, they're down 3-2 in Dallas and Kawhi Leonard is playing 43 minutes, Paul George is playing 46 minutes, and he has a 45-point game historic performance and wins that game. Well, Giannis can't do that if he's playing 35 minutes a night. And for whatever reason, they're very strict with his rotations where they pull him out in 3 to 4 minute spurts, sit him for a minute and all of that. So you mentioned it earlier, but for me to fully trust the Bucks, I think that there has to be a point where Giannis, Chris Middleton, and Drew Holiday are playing 40-plus minutes a night. Because KD and Kyrie, I promise you, are going to play 40-plus minutes a night in those series, and they're going to be able to control just about every possession in the game. And I think that it's important for Giannis to get those same possessions too.
Agreed. And on that point, Kyrie played 45 minutes this past game. KD played 40. So that's one person right there that's always on the court at all times. And I don't think I'm pretty confident Giannis, Holiday, and Middleton all played under 36. Like, that is inexcusable. Like, why are they not out there? I mean, you see the Mavericks and Clippers. Like, you see Kawhi, even though his knee is messed up and will be forever, the dude still goes out there and labors for like over 40 minutes. And like, you just have to. It's the playoffs. Like, what are you not being out there for? Like, would you rather conserve more energy and be on the bench than have the chance of like winning another game? Because you only get 4. It's a 7-game series. Like, what are you saving yourself for, I guess, is my question. And with the conditioning, like, I feel like Giannis is definitely more than capable of being out there for over 40 minutes. Like, yes, his style of basketball is like definitely like more demanding on the body, but he doesn't have to be the main playmaker every time. When Drew Holiday was the main playmaker against the Heat, that seemed to work out pretty well. But for whatever reason, this past game, it just went all back to Giannis, and that's where you'd think, like, okay, maybe give it to Drew more. That would also help conserve Giannis's energy, but for whatever reason, they didn't do that, and they lost and they shot horribly. So I just don't understand Bud's logic on that one, and I think a lot of people are getting a little frustrated seeing Kyrie play 45 and Drew Holiday is playing 35 or whatever he's playing.
Yeah, and then off that, the only thing I would add is just the fact that we've kind of been over this, but I think it's the Nets' hardest matchup, but I also say it's probably the Bucks' hardest matchup. So why aren't minutes up there? So definitely would be an interesting thing to monitor in the games coming up, because I do think both of you have been saying about that.
Definitely. But I guess bottom line here, we all think they can make the finals without James Harden. Now, it's not confirmed he'll be out for a while, but it's not promising seeing how long he was out in the regular season, and now he's sore again. So we'll see. We think they can make the finals, but the Bucks are probably their hardest matchup to get there. Going to be much harder than the Hawks or 76ers in our minds, at least. But they can do it. It's KD and Kyrie Irving, so you never bet against them, I guess.